Welcome back, welcome back. Travel writer William Dalrymple has had his fair share of strange travelling companions, but perhaps never quite as strange as his latest world tour on a bus containing what he calls ganja-smoking tantric madmen from rural Bengal. A collection of singing monks, mystic minstrels, and a part-time god, It's all connected with his new book, 9 Lives in Search of the Sacred in Modern India. And he's with me now. Great to have you with us. What was in fact the part-time god sacred?
Well, the part-time god is, for most of the year, a well builder in the week and a manual labourer and a prison warder in an extremely violent jail in northern Kerala during the weekend. But for 3 months of the year, he becomes a Teyam dancer. This is the ritual dance of northern Kerala. And the Dalit, the untouchable, is transformed into a god. And even the Brahmins, who would normally disdain even to touch him or walk on the same pavement as him, bow down and touch his feet. It's extraordinary. It's like carnival in medieval Europe. All the norms of society are reversed. It's wonderful. It's fantastic.
And what about in your search for mystic India and so on, where did the tantric madman fit into this that we just mentioned?
The search for mystic India, just to sort of put it in context, is very much looking at what is left of that sort of stereotype in the new India. This is an India which is expected to overtake the US in the economy by 2050. And how are these ancient traditions, the Buddhist monks, the Jain nuns, the Sufi saints, and so on, how are they surviving in the new India? And the madmen are the Bauls of Bengal, B-A-U-L-S, which means in Bengali merely the madman, the possessed. And these guys, they're rather wonderful. They have a philosophy which is a mixture of Buddhism, Sufism, Tantra, and they busk in trains and at bus stops and along the roads of rural Bengal in tea shops. And they have these wonderful songs which are a mixture of, I'll read you a short verse, which is probably the best way of sort of conveying the teachings that they have. They busk on the roads, and they make their very profound philosophy accessible to ordinary people just by singing these lovely songs. It goes, typical verse is, "Never plunge in the river of lust, for you will not reach the shore. It is a river without banks, where typhoons rage and the current is strong. Only the masters of the 5 rasas, the juices of love, know the play of the tides. Their boats do not sink. Paddled by oars of love, they row strongly upstream." It's lovely.
Very nice. Did you translate that?
It's not my translation. It's an adaptation of an existing translation.
Yeah. So if there's so much to write about there, are there other places in the world that you dream of seeing?
Well, I've got a kind of patch. I've written a lot about the Middle East too. I did a book called From the Holy Mountain, looking at the remaining Christian monasteries in Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, and what was left of the old Eastern Orthodox churches, which is still very strong in some places. In a country like Syria, which Bush would have us believe is the part of the axis of evil, one of the most tolerant, religiously tolerant countries I've ever seen, with scout troops processing through the streets of old Damascus, carrying crosses and singing hymns. Something which is a kind of model of pluralism in that part of the world.
And does all the modern technology and so on change travel writing?
Well, absolutely. This is the subject of the book, really, how these things are surviving. I went looking for a tantric skull feeder. This is a man who takes skulls from the cremation ground and feeds them dal and rice and whiskey with a view to using the spirits. I mean, fantastic Orientalist exotica. But when I talked to this guy and tried to interview him, I'd read about him in an academic paper. He has the largest collection of skulls in Bengal. When I actually found him, I tried to interview him, and he said, "Well, actually, I really shouldn't say anything." And I said, "Why?" You know, I thought there was some veil of secrecy. He said, "No." He said, "My 2 boys are ophthalmologists in New Jersey." They'd tell me, "Dad, you must stop giving these interviews. You're giving us a very bad reputation."
That's a great vision of, oh God,
and that's very much the sort of
he's
thing.
On again.
Well, the Bowls, too. We had this big concert at the Barbican. 3,500 people turned up. And it had taken almost as long to get these people visas, passports, police clearance, and all the rest of it as it did to actually write the book. And 2 of them had passports. And just before we went on stage, I said, you know, you travelled before. You two had passports. These are old men with dreadlocks and looking really the part, saffron robes. And they said, yes, it was about 1971. There was some man, what was he called? Mick Jagger got us to come to his housewarming. It was the time of Beggar's Banquet, and these guys had come over. So the link between the exotic and the extremes of religious mysticism and the globalized India are more intricate than one might imagine.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, William, for that image there. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
And now, a tragic, controversial story of the week. A couple in the United States have been sentenced to 6 months in prison because they refused to get any medical help at all for their sick daughter. They prayed instead. And as a result, without medical help, she died. Turns out 11-year-old Madeline Newman had undiagnosed diabetes, which would have been curable with drugs and medical expertise. Maybe something of an extreme case, but for some people the power of prayer and spiritual healing offers them more hope than conventional medicine. In a moment I'll be joined from Manchester by Andrew Butterfield, a member of the World Healing Crusade. But first, beside me in the studio is Carol Cooper, who's a family doctor and writes on medical matters for the Sun newspaper. This is an extraordinary case, tragic case. Have you ever heard, in your experience, of this sort of thing happening? I've seen people refuse to let their children have medical treatment, but not necessarily with this result.
This is certainly the most extreme end of the spectrum. I see people who don't want to have conventional treatments for themselves or their children. I've seen one patient who decided to have homeopathic treatment instead of antibiotics for her pneumonia, and she ended up in the intensive care unit. But I think it is quite shocking, I think, that a parent would reject conventional treatment in favour of spiritual healing.
Do you think spiritual healing can ever work? I mean, not necessarily instead of medical treatment, but perhaps where medical treatment wouldn't work.
I think spiritual healing is probably quite good at making a patient feel better rather than perhaps get better. And I think a lot of complementary therapists tend to confuse feeling better with getting better. And, you know, so do some patients. I certainly wouldn't decry anything that's going to offer comfort or help someone through an illness. You know, you might want to watch TV or be read your favourite story, or a child might want to hug their favourite teddy, and that's going to make them feel better. But I think, you know, I would advocate that alongside conventional therapy. And the problem with a lot of complementary remedies and spiritual healing is that they've not been subjected to randomised control studies, which is, you know, it's the gold standard for testing treatments.
What do you mean they're not qualified?
They're not. The research has not proven that they work. Research has not shown that they work. They haven't had large studies, randomise the patients, treat some of them with the method of healing and some without, and seeing whether actually healing works.
And do you believe in miracles yourself?
I don't believe that they don't exist. I think it's possible, but I wouldn't count on one to cure my sore throat or a heart attack.
Carol, thank you very much. So let's turn now to Andrew Butterfield up there in Manchester, and we welcome you. Just that last question, do you believe in miracles?
I do believe in miracles, Sir David, yes. They're God-given.
God-given, yes. Not the result of the healer, you mean, but of God?
No. True healers work on behalf of God as channels, and it doesn't matter if you're a Christian, a Muslim or a Jew. God works through all individuals that he created to a greater or lesser extent.
What about in like the dramatic case this week of Madeline?
Yes.
That in fact her parents chose to pray and rejected any medical treatment as such, and after she died it was discovered that she had a condition of undiagnosed diabetes,
Yes.
which could have been treated medically. Does that happen a lot? I've known of it happening on occasions where people do endanger the lives of somebody by going to spiritual healing.
Right. First of all, our condolences go out to the family and all concerned. Obviously, I'm very sorry to hear about the death of this young child. Those parents made a judgment call, and I'm not here to criticise them, and neither should anybody. They should be left in their grief, and they should be supported and helped. Right. Doctors, nurses, psychiatrists, psychologists, all in the caring professions, both on the complementary and the allopathic side, have a role to play.
But whose role is most preeminent? I mean, if someone came to you and had a child who was ill, would you say that they should go to spiritual healing first, and then, if that doesn't work, go to a doctor, or what?
Right. I represent an international healing charity called World Healing Crusade in Blackpool. We, as a registered charity, would always recommend that our patients, our clients, our members, whatever you want to call them, make contact with appropriate medical people, seek help through their GP, through their private medical service, through their private medical insurance. We will act as a supplement to the medical teams that are helping and supporting the individuals, because we're all working together. It's part of the same thing. That's why it should be complementary, it should be wholesome. That is both on the allopathic side and also on the complementary side as well, the spiritual healing side. We talk about divine healing, which is prayer through God. Had those parents contacted us, we would have prayed. And we would have also said, yes, we suggest it's wise to seek medical advice because they are working as God's angels, equally as you and I are.
And what about Carol made the point that, in fact, one of the things she was worried about spiritual healing was that very often the spiritual healer is not medically qualified. Well, that's obviously true, isn't it?
Yes, it is. We don't need, Sir David, we don't need to be qualified. We need to be accountable, of course we do. And we apply hard and fast rules that, first and foremost, we respect the individual who seeks help. And through seeking help, we're looking at contacting doctors, nurses, etc., people who have already made a diagnosis of that person's condition. We are used in a secondary or even a tertiary capacity on most often cases.
And what about the situation? Have you experienced yourself, Andrew, situations where someone who'd been given up without hope has then had a miraculous cure through spiritual healing? Have you experienced miraculous cures?
I have, for myself and also for members as well, yes. I have experienced people where they were written off by the medical profession. Okay, they may not well accept that term. I'm not siding with for or against. What I'm basically saying is, if somebody is given the last rites, they're pretty well as good as dead so far as most people are concerned. I have a faith and I have a belief in God as a simple Christian that we can bring about, as a channel, if you will, divine healing through God for that individual, either absently or directly through prayer.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, Andrew.
Thank you, Sir David.
I'm reminded of the words of Dr. Anton Rupert, who said on one occasion, "He who does not believe in miracles is not a practical realist." Well, anyway, that's all for this week. My thanks to all of my guests. Do join us again in 7 days' time for another packed edition of Frost Over the World.